She stood behind the counter, wiping her hands on a white cloth that had long since lost its brightness. The restaurant was quiet for now, but she knew it wouldn't stay that way. Lunch hour was coming, and when it did, the place would fill up fast. Suits and ties, tourists with maps, and the occasional regular who always asked for her by name. Tasha had worked at this place for 4 years. She started as a part-time cleaner while going to school, then moved up to bussing tables, and finally became one of the most dependable servers on staff. People liked her, not just because she remembered their favorite drinks or brought extra napkins without being asked, but because she made them feel seen, like they mattered. She had a way about her, a smile that didn't look forced, eyes that listened before her ears did. Some people came here not just for the food, but for the way she made them feel during a hard day. But what most of them didn't know was that Tasha could speak fluent Chinese. It wasn't something she advertised, not because she was ashamed, but because she'd learned early on that some people get uncomfortable when you surprise them. When you don't fit into the box they put you in. She picked up Mandarin the same way she taught herself to cook, fix a broken sink, or balance her checkbook before she even turned 20, on her own, late at night, with books and online videos, and sheer willpower. It started when she was 16. Her grandmother had taken in a neighbor's kid whose parents were out of town. The boy was from China, barely spoke English, and looked completely lost. Tasha tried to help him find his way around. But every time she opened her mouth, he flinched like he couldn't understand a word she said. That bothered her, not because he didn't speak English, it wasn't his fault, but because she realized how powerless she felt trying to help someone who needed her. So she went home that night, pulled out an old dictionary and started learning. It took years. She watched Chinese dramas with subtitles, practiced writing characters on notebook paper, and even found a language exchange group online where she could talk to native speakers. By the time she was 22, she could read menus, order food, and hold full conversations in Mandarin. But in a city like New York, where everyone seemed to be chasing something bigger, speaking another language didn't always feel like an advantage. Especially when you were black, female, and working in a job most people saw as temporary. Still, she used it when she could. Sometimes she'd help the delivery guy who only spoke Chinese. Other times she'd quietly translate for an older couple who looked confused, and once in a while she'd switch into Mandarin just for fun, testing herself to see if anyone noticed. Most didn't, until that night. It was a slow Thursday evening. The dinner rush had passed, and the restaurant was mostly empty except for a few lingering guests. One of them was a man sitting alone near the window, typing furiously on his laptop. He wore a dark coat, expensive shoes, and a tired expression. Tasha walked past his table, balancing a tray of empty glasses. As she reached the back, she heard a voice call out in Mandarin, "Excuse me, can I get some more water?" She turned around. It was the man by the window. She blinked once, then smiled. "Of course," she said in perfect Mandarin. "I'll bring you a fresh glass right away." He looked surprised, then curious. When she returned with the water, he didn't thank her. Instead, he asked, "Where did you learn to speak like that?" Tasha laughed softly. "From practice, and a lot of mistakes." He studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Impressive," he said. "You sound like someone who grew up in Beijing." She shrugged. "Close enough, I've never been there, but I hope to someday." He gave her a small smile, then went back to his work. She didn't think much of the conversation after that. People complimented her sometimes, but they always left the next day and life kept moving. What she didn't know was that the man by the window had connections, big ones, and he hadn't forgotten her. The next morning he returned, alone again, and this time he asked specifically for her. She approached the table cautiously, unsure of why he wanted to talk again. "I'm serious about what I said last night," he began, closing his laptop. "Your skills are rare. You should be using them somewhere bigger than this place." Tasha didn't know how to respond. No one had ever told her that before, not like this. "I run a company that deals with international business," he continued. "We need people who can bridge cultures, who can speak the language and understand the customs. Someone like you. Her heart started beating faster. Was he offering her a job? I can't promise anything overnight, he said. But if you're willing, I'd like to meet with my team tomorrow and see if we can make something happen. She nodded, almost too quickly. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. He handed her a card with his number and office address. Come tomorrow morning. Wear something professional. She stared at the card like it might disappear if she blinked. As he got up to leave, he paused and added, You have something special, you know. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Then he was gone. Tasha stood there holding the card in her hand, feeling like she was dreaming. For once, it felt like the world had stopped spinning just long enough to notice her. She imagined packing, up her apartment, saying goodbye to the restaurant, stepping into a new life, one where her talent wasn't hidden behind a serving tray. She couldn't wait for tomorrow, but what she didn't know was that not everyone wanted her to leave. Some people preferred her exactly where she was, and they weren't going to let her go so easily. The next morning, Tasha woke up earlier than usual. She couldn't sleep much anyway. Her mind kept replaying the conversation from the night before. The man in the dark coat, his quiet confidence, the way he spoke like her skills actually mattered. She stood in front of the mirror, smoothing out the wrinkles on her best blouse. It wasn't fancy, just something she bought years ago for job interviews, but it fit well enough. She paired it with black pants and polished shoes she hadn't worn since forever. Standing there, she almost didn't recognize herself. For once, she didn't look like someone who served tables or cleaned up after others. She looked ready. For what exactly, she wasn't sure yet. But she felt hopeful. By the time she stepped into the restaurant, the sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky orange and pink. The early shift staff were already setting up, stacking chairs, wiping down tables, brewing coffee. Everything seemed normal, quiet, routine. But Tasha knew better. Today wasn't going to be like any other day. At least that's what she told herself as she clocked in and started preparing for breakfast service. An hour passed, then 2. Customers trickled in, some yawning over cups of coffee, others scanning menus like they'd rather be anywhere else. Tasha worked steadily, pouring drinks, taking orders, balancing plates. Every now and then she glanced at the door, half expecting the man from last night to walk in again. But he didn't come. It wasn't until mid-morning, when the lunch rush began to pick up, that things changed. A group of people entered the restaurant, laughing loudly and drawing attention. They were dressed sharply, suits, ties, leather bags, and moved like they owned the place. One of them caught sight of Tasha and waved her over. "Hey, you," he said, pointing at her. "We need menus." She hurried toward them, grabbing a stack from the counter. As she handed them out, one of the men leaned back in his chair and gave her a long look. Something about his expression made her uneasy, but she ignored it. This wasn't the first time customers had stared at her like she was invisible, or worse, like she didn't belong here. What happened next came so fast that Tasha barely had time to process it. The manager appeared out of nowhere, snapping her fingers to get Tasha's attention. "Back office now." Tasha frowned. "Is everything okay?" "Just go," the manager snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Confused, Tasha followed her to the tiny room at the back of the restaurant where supplies were stored. There was barely enough space for both of them to stand without bumping into each other. The air smelled faintly of bleach and stale coffee. "Listen carefully," the manager said, crossing her arms. "You're done here, effective immediately." Tasha blinked. "What? Why?" "We don't have time for explanations," the manager replied, avoiding eye contact. "Your stuff is already packed. Take it and leave." "But," Tasha stammered, trying to make sense of what was happening. "I haven't done anything wrong. What's going on?" The manager sighed heavily, like Tasha was wasting her time. "Look, it's not personal. It's business. You understand how these things work." "No, I don't," Tasha shot back, her voice rising despite herself. "Tell me why I'm being fired." For a moment, the manager hesitated. Then she muttered under her breath, "Orders from above." "From who?" Tasha demanded. "Who gave the order?" The manager shook her head. "Not my place to say. Just take your things and go. Tasha's chest tightened. She wanted to argue, to demand answers, to scream loud enough for everyone in the restaurant to hear. But deep down, she knew it wouldn't change anything. People like her didn't win fights against bosses like hers, so she left. She walked out of the restaurant carrying a small cardboard box filled with her belongings, a few pens, an apron, a spare uniform shirt, and the card the man from last night had given her. Her hands trembled as she clutched it tightly, afraid it might slip through her fingers and disappear forever. Outside, the city buzzed around her, cars honking, people rushing past, construction workers yelling over drills. But none of it touched her. All she could think about was how quickly everything had fallen apart. 1 minute, she was being offered a chance to step into a new life. The next, she was standing on the sidewalk, unemployed and confused. She sat down on a bench nearby, staring blankly at the card in her hand. Who was this man? What did he want from her? And why had someone gone out of their way to stop her from meeting him? Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw a text message waiting for her. It was from an unknown number. Good morning, are you still coming today? Tasha froze. Was this really him? The man from the restaurant? She typed back cautiously. Who is this? Seconds later, a reply came through. It's me, from yesterday, remember? Her heart skipped a beat. She hesitated, unsure of what to say. Finally, she typed. Something came up. I can't make it. There was a pause. Then another message appeared. Are you all right? Tasha swallowed hard. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away. She couldn't afford to cry right now, not here, not in public. I'll be fine, she wrote back. Thank you for asking. That was all she could manage. She turned off her phone and slipped it back into her pocket. For the rest of the day, she wandered aimlessly through the streets, letting the chaos of the city swallow her whole. Everywhere she looked, people seemed to be moving forward, hailing cabs, chatting, on phones making plans. Meanwhile, she felt stuck, trapped between the life she'd been building and the dream she'd glimpsed for just a moment before it vanished. As the hours dragged on, anger began to replace sadness. Anger at whoever had decided she wasn't good enough. Anger at the system that let people like her get trampled without a second thought, and anger at herself for believing even for a second that things might turn out differently this time. By evening, she found herself sitting on the steps of her apartment building, staring up at the stars. She didn't know what to do next. Part of her wanted to call the man back, to explain what had happened and ask for help. But another part of her was too proud, or too scared to try. Instead, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Tomorrow was a new day. Maybe by then she'd figure out how to fight back. Or maybe she'd find a way to move on. Either way, she wasn't giving up, not completely. Not yet, because somewhere deep inside, she still believed in the possibility of more. More than this. More than what the world had tried to force on her. And as long as that belief remained, she knew she'd survive. The next morning, Tasha woke up feeling like she'd been hit by a truck. Her body was sore from sleeping on the couch instead of her bed, a habit she picked up when stress kept her tossing and turning all night. Her mind felt even worse. Every time she closed her eyes, flashes of yesterday came rushing back. The manager's cold stare, the tiny office smelling of bleach, the box of belongings she carried out like some kind of failure. She sat up slowly, rubbing her temples. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the fridge in the kitchen. She lived alone, not by choice, but because life hadn't given her much room for anything else. Her grandmother used to say, "You're strong enough to carry this world on your shoulders." But right now, Tasha wasn't so sure. All she wanted was answers. Why had they fired her? Who gave the order? And why did it feel like someone didn't want her to succeed? She glanced at the card sitting on the coffee table. The edges were slightly bent from where she'd gripped it too tightly last night. For a moment, she considered throwing it away. What was the point of holding on to something that reminded her of what she'd lost? But then again, maybe it was the only thing keeping her tethered to hope. So she left it there, staring at it like it might suddenly speak and tell her what to do next. Her stomach growled, reminding her she hadn't eaten since lunch the day before. She got up, shuffled into the kitchen, and opened the fridge. There wasn't much inside. Half an onion, a carton of eggs, and a nearly empty jar of peanut butter. Enough for one meal, maybe two. Not enough to get her through whatever came next. As she cracked an egg into a pan, her phone buzzed on the counter. She froze, unsure if she should answer it. After everything that happened, hearing from anyone felt dangerous. Still, curiosity won out. She wiped her hands on a towel and picked up the phone. It was a text message from the same unknown number as before. "I'm sorry to hear about yesterday. Can we talk?" Tasha stared at the screen, her heart pounding. Should she respond, or just ignore it and pretend nothing ever happened? Part of her wanted to reach out, to explain, to vent, to scream until someone finally listened. But another part of her was afraid of looking desperate, afraid of being rejected again. Finally, she typed back, "What do you want to know?" The reply came almost instantly. "Everything." Tasha hesitated. Could she trust him? Was he really interested in helping her? Or was this just another way for someone to look down on her? She didn't have the energy to play games, but she also couldn't afford to let this slip away. Maybe, just maybe, he could help her figure out what went wrong. So she started typing. Slowly at first, then faster as the words poured out of her. "They fired me, out of nowhere. Said it was orders from above. No explanation, no warning, just told me to leave." There was a pause before he responded. "Do you have any idea who gave those orders?" Tasha thought about it. The manager had refused to say anything specific, but there was one person who always seemed to pull strings behind the scenes, the owner of the restaurant. Mrs. Evelyn Carlyle. A woman known for her sharp tongue and sharper rules. Everyone tiptoed around her, afraid of saying the wrong thing or stepping out of line. "Maybe," Tasha wrote back, "but I can't prove it." Another pause. Then, "Let me see what I can find out. In the meantime, take care of yourself." Tasha set the phone down and leaned against the counter, exhaling deeply. For the first time in hours, she felt something. Not relief exactly, but maybe a flicker of hope. Someone out there cared enough to ask questions even if she wasn't sure why. Over the next few days, Tasha tried to piece together what had happened. She reached out to coworkers discreetly, asking if anyone knew anything about her sudden firing. Most of them avoided her calls or changed the subject. One waitress, though, a younger girl named Lisa, finally agreed to meet her for coffee. They sat in a corner booth at a small cafe across town. Lisa stirred her drink nervously, glancing over her shoulder every few seconds like someone might be listening. "I heard whispers," Lisa admitted quietly. "Mrs. Carlyle was furious after. You talked to that guy, said you were showing off and making everyone else look bad." Tasha frowned. "Showing off? I was just doing my job," Lisa shrugged. That's not how she saw it. She thinks people like us should stay in our lane. You know, keep our heads down and don't draw attention. Tasha clenched her fists under the table. People like us. Those 3 words stung more than anything else. She'd spent years proving herself, working twice as hard as anyone else just to earn a little respect. And now here she was being punished for speaking another language, for having a skill that most people would kill to have. "What about the other staff?" Tasha asked. "Did anyone say anything?" Lisa shook her head. "No one wants trouble. They're scared of losing their jobs too." Tasha nodded, though her chest felt heavy. Of course no one spoke up. Why would they? Standing up for someone else meant risking everything. And in a place like this, survival came first. After the meeting, Tasha walked home in silence. The streets were crowded, but she barely noticed. Her mind raced with questions. How could she fight back against someone like Mrs. Carlyle? What proof did she have that she'd been treated unfairly? Even if she took the case to labor boards or lawyers, would anyone believe her? By the time she reached her building, frustration bubbled inside her like boiling water. She climbed the stairs quickly, unlocked her door, and slammed it shut behind her. Then she sank onto the floor, letting the anger wash over her. For a long time, she sat there, staring at the wall. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't bother wiping them away. Let them fall. Let the pain come out. Because holding it in wasn't doing her any good. Eventually, exhaustion took over. She dragged herself to the couch and curled up under a blanket, clutching the card from the man in her hand. His name was printed neatly on the front, along with his title and company logo. Whatever his intentions were, he was her only lead now, her only chance to uncover the truth. As she drifted off to sleep, one thought lingered in her mind. If the world wouldn't give her justice, she'd have to take it for herself, and she wasn't going to stop until she did. The days that followed were some of the hardest Tasha had ever faced. She spent most of her time pacing around her tiny apartment, replaying every conversation, every moment leading up to her firing. Her mind kept circling back to one question. Why? Why did Mrs. Carlyle feel so threatened by her speaking Chinese? Why did people seem so uncomfortable when she stepped outside the box they'd built for her? She wasn't naive. She knew the world could be cruel, especially to someone like her, a black woman trying to rise above what others expected. But this felt personal, like someone had looked at her and decided she didn't deserve a chance to shine. Determined to find answers, Tasha started digging deeper. She couldn't afford a lawyer. She barely had enough money left to cover rent, but she figured there had to be another way. So she began making calls. First, she reached out to local labor boards, explaining her situation as calmly as she could. They listened politely but warned her that without concrete evidence of discrimination, there wasn't much they could do. Frustrated but unwilling to give up, she turned to online forums and support groups for advice. She posted anonymously on websites dedicated to workplace rights, sharing her story and asking if anyone had been through something similar. The responses poured in quickly, some offering sympathy, others sharing their own experiences of being silenced or pushed aside. One message stood out. A woman wrote, "Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. Find someone who can expose the truth for you." Tasha read those words over and over again. Expose the truth. It sounded risky, maybe even reckless, but what choice did she have? Sitting back and doing nothing wasn't an option anymore. She decided to start small. Over the next few days, she visited the restaurant during off hours, pretending to pick up forgotten items or check on old co-workers. Each time she paid close attention to the staff, the management, the way things operated behind closed doors. She noticed how tense everyone seemed, like they were walking on eggshells. Conversations stopped whenever she walked by. Even Lisa, who had shared information before, avoided eye contact now. One afternoon, while lingering near the kitchen entrance, Tasha overheard two servers talking in hushed tones. Their voices carried just enough for her to catch snippets of their conversation. "Did you hear?" one of them whispered. "Mrs. Carlyle said she doesn't want anyone disrupting the natural order." "What does that even mean?" the other replied. "She thinks Tasha was trying to climb too high, showing off her skills, impressing customers. People like us aren't supposed to stand out." Tasha's stomach churned. People like us. Again, those three words hit her like a punch to the gut. She clenched her fists and forced herself to stay calm. This was exactly what she needed. Proof that her firing wasn't random. That it was deliberate, but overhearing gossip wasn't enough. She needed something tangible, something undeniable. And then it hit her. Mrs. Carlyle's office. It was locked, of course. No one except the manager and a few trusted employees had access. But Tasha knew where the spare key was hidden, an old trick she'd picked up during her years working late shifts. Sometimes, when the manager forgot her keys, she'd pull out a spare tucked inside a fake potted plant near the supply closet. That night after the restaurant closed, Tasha waited until the streets emptied and the lights dimmed. Then, heart-pounding, she slipped through the back door using her old employee code. The code still worked, a small victory that gave her a flicker of hope. Inside, the restaurant was eerily quiet. Shadows stretched across the floor, cast by the faint glow of streetlights filtering through the windows. Tasha moved carefully, avoiding creaky floorboards and keeping an ear out for any noise. When she reached the office, she hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the fake plant. What if someone found out? What if she got caught? But fear wasn't going to stop her, not this time. She grabbed the key, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of perfume and paper. Files were stacked neatly on shelves, papers scattered across the desk. Tasha scanned everything quickly, looking for anything related to her firing. And then she saw it, a folder labeled Employee Conduct. Her name was written in bold letters on the front. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were notes from meetings, complaints filed against her, none of which she'd been aware of, and a handwritten memo from Mrs. Carlyle herself. The memo read, "We cannot allow employees to step outside their roles. Speaking multiple languages creates division among staff and gives certain individuals undue attention. Tasha Morgan must be let go immediately to prevent further disruption." Tasha's breath caught in her throat. There it was, in black and white. Proof that her firing wasn't about performance or mistakes. It was about control, about keeping people like her in their place. For a moment, she stood there, clutch filing line. Brakes. Tasha stared at the memo in her hands, her heart pounding like a drum. The words blurred together as tears welled up in her eyes. She had suspected the truth all along, but seeing it written down made it real, painfully, devastatingly real. This wasn't just about her speaking Chinese or impressing customers, it was about power, about someone deciding she didn't deserve to step outside the box they'd built for her. She folded the memo carefully and slipped it into her pocket. Then she grabbed her phone, snapping photos of everything else in the folder. Notes from meetings, complaints filed against her, anything that could back up her story. Her hands shook as she worked, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Every second felt like an eternity, every creak of the floorboards a potential threat. But she couldn't stop now, not when she was this close to uncovering the truth. When she finished, she locked the office door behind her, returned the spare key to its hiding spot, and slipped out of the restaurant as quietly as she'd come in. Outside, the cool night air hit her face, and she took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. For the first time in days, she felt something other than anger or despair. She felt powerful, like she finally had a weapon to fight back with. Next morning, Tasha sat at her kitchen table staring at the photos on her phone. What should she do with them? Posting online seemed risky. It might expose her identity or get her into legal trouble. Going to the media felt too public, too raw. But there was one person who had already shown interest in her story, one person who might actually be able to help. She pulled out the card he'd given her, the man from the restaurant, and dialed the number printed on it. Her fingers trembled as she pressed each digit, half expecting him not to answer. But after 3 rings, his voice came through, calm and professional. "Hello? It's me," Tasha said, her voice cracking slightly. "From the restaurant." There was a pause, then, "I've been wondering if you'd call. How are you holding up?" "I'm okay," she lied. "But I need your help. Tell me what happened." So she told him everything. About sneaking into the office, finding the memo, and realizing why she'd been fired. She sent him the photos she'd taken, explaining how Mrs. Carlyle had deliberately targeted her. When she finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, he spoke. "This is serious. If what you're saying is true, and based on what I've seen so far, I believe you, then this isn't just about you. It's about fairness, about standing up for people who don't have a voice." Tasha nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "That's exactly how I feel. But I don't know what to do next." "Leave that to me," he said firmly. "I'll handle it." Over the next few days, Tasha waited anxiously for news. She barely slept, jumping every time her phone buzzed. She wasn't sure what to expect. Would he follow through? Or would he disappear like everyone else who'd promised to help? Then, one evening, her phone lit up with another text from him. It's done. Meet me tomorrow morning at my office. Tasha stared at the message, her pulse racing. Done? What did that mean? Had he talked to Mrs. Carlyle, gone to the press, filed a lawsuit? She wanted to ask, but something told her to wait, to trust him, for now. The next morning she dressed carefully, choosing her best outfit again. This time she added a touch of confidence, a bold red lipstick she rarely wore. As she stepped into the sleek glass building where his company was, headquartered, she felt a mix of nerves and determination. She hadn't planned on coming here under these circumstances, but she was ready to face whatever came next. His assistant greeted her warmly and led her to a large corner office overlooking the city. He stood by the window gazing out at the skyline. When he turned to face her, his expression was serious but kind. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I've looked into the situation and I can confirm that your firing was unjustified. Mrs. Carlyle violated multiple labor laws, including discrimination based on race and perceived status." Tasha blinked, stunned. "How did you find all that out?" He smiled faintly. "Let's just say I have resources most people don't. More importantly, I've already contacted the labor board and escalated the case. They're launching an official investigation." Relief washed over her, followed quickly by disbelief. "What happens to me now?" "That depends on you," he replied. "You have options. You could file a lawsuit, demand compensation, or even go public with your story. But I also want to offer you something else. A fresh start." Her eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "I meant what I said before. Your skills are rare, and they're valuable. I still want you to join my team. We're expanding our international division, and someone like you, someone who understands culture, language, and resilience, would be perfect for the role." Tasha's mind raced. Everything she'd dreamed of just weeks ago was suddenly within reach again. But this time it felt different. This time she wasn't just accepting an opportunity blindly. She was stepping into a new life knowing she'd fought for it. I don't know what to say," she admitted softly. "You don't have to. Decide right away," he said gently. "Take your time. Think about it. But know this, no matter what you choose, I'll support you." For the first time in what felt like forever, Tasha allowed herself to hope. Hope that things could change. Hope that she could build a future where she wasn't defined by someone else's rules. As she left the office later that day, she glanced up at the towering skyscrapers around her. The city felt alive, buzzing with possibility. She didn't know exactly what lay ahead, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let anyone silence her again. And maybe, just maybe, she could inspire others to do the same. Months passed and Tasha's life began to transform in ways she never imagined. The new job was everything she'd hoped for, and more. She traveled the world, meeting people from different cultures, negotiating deals, and using her Mandarin. Skills to bridge gaps between teams who barely spoke the same language. Every day felt like a step forward, a chance to prove that she belonged exactly where she was. But it wasn't just about the work. It was about finally being seen. Not as just another waitress, but as someone with value, someone who could make a difference. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she had to shrink herself to fit into someone else's expectations. The company's international division thrived under her guidance. Her ability to connect with clients on a personal level set her apart. Whether it was explaining cultural nuances during meetings or helping colleagues navigate unfamiliar customs, Tasha became known as the glue that held everything together. People trusted her, respected her, and looked up to her. Still, she didn't forget where she came from. On weekends, when she wasn't jetting off to Tokyo or Beijing, she spent her time mentoring young people from underserved communities. She volunteered at community centers, teaching free classes in communication and leadership. Sometimes she even taught basic Mandarin to kids who dreamed of traveling someday. One evening after a particularly long day of training, a teenage girl approached her shyly. "Can I ask you something?" she said, clutching a notebook tightly. to her chest. "Of course," Tasha replied, smiling warmly. "What's on your mind?" The girl hesitated before blurting out, "How did you get so brave? Like, how do you stand up for yourself when everyone tells you no?" Tasha paused, thinking carefully about her answer. It was a question she'd asked herself countless times over the years. How had she found the courage to fight back? To keep going when it felt like the whole world was against her? "I'm not sure I'd call myself brave," she admitted softly. "But here's what I've learned. Sometimes bravery isn't about being fearless, it's about doing the right thing, even when you're scared. Even when you don't know if things will work out." The girl nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "That makes sense, but what if people still try to stop you?" Tasha leaned in closer, lowering her voice slightly. "Then you find a way to push through anyway, because once you start believing in yourself, it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. You become unstoppable." The girl smiled, a small, tentative smile, but it was enough. Enough to remind Tasha why she kept coming back to these community centers week after week. Enough to remind her that her journey wasn't just about her anymore. It was about showing others that they mattered too. As the months turned into years, Tasha's story spread beyond her immediate circle. A local news station picked up on her rise from waitress to executive and featured her in a segment about overcoming adversity. At first, she hesitated to share her story publicly. What would people think? Would they judge her for speaking out? But then she remembered the girl at the community center, the one who wanted to know how to be brave, and realized that maybe, just maybe, her story could inspire someone else to keep fighting. The interview went viral almost overnight. Social media lit up with messages of support, admiration, and gratitude. Strangers reached out to thank her for reminding them that their dreams were worth chasing no matter how impossible they seemed. Some shared their own struggles, losing jobs, facing discrimination, feeling invisible, and thanked her for giving them hope. For Tasha, it was overwhelming in the best way possible. She hadn't expected this kind of response, but she welcomed it. It reminded her that she wasn't alone, that there were thousands of people out there fighting the same battles she once had. Not long after the interview aired, Tasha received an invitation to speak at a conference for young professionals. Standing on stage, looking out at a sea of faces eager to learn, she felt a surge of pride. Pride in how far she'd come. Pride in knowing that her voice mattered now. "I want to tell you something," she began, gripping the microphone tightly. "When I was younger, I used to think my dreams were too big for me, that I wasn't smart enough, talented enough, or lucky enough to achieve them. And honestly, there were days when the world tried to convince me of that too." She paused, scanning the crowd. "But here's the thing. Your dreams aren't too big for you. They're meant for you. And if you hold on to them tightly enough, if you refuse to let anyone take them away, you'll find a way to make them happen." A ripple of applause spread through the room, growing louder with each passing second. When it finally died down, Tasha took a deep breath and added one last thought. "Don't let anyone tell you who you're supposed to be. Only you get to decide that. So go out there and be bold. Be brave. Be unapologetically you. Because the world needs more people like you." By the time she stepped off stage, tears streamed down her face, not from sadness, but from joy. Joy in knowing that she'd made it. Not just to a better job or a bigger paycheck, but to a place where she could truly make a difference. Years later, Tasha sat on a park bench overlooking the city skyline, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Beside her sat the folder containing the memo she'd found all those years ago, the one that had nearly broken her spirit. She opened it slowly, running her fingers over the typed words. Words that had once felt like chains, now felt like trophies. Trophies of resilience, of survival, of triumph. She closed the folder and tucked it back into her bag, smiling softly to herself. Life hadn't been easy, and it probably never would be. But she'd learned to embrace the challenges, to see them not as obstacles but as opportunities to grow stronger. And as she stood up to leave, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring, she whispered two words to herself. Thank you. Thank you for not giving up, for standing tall when the world tried to knock you down, for proving to yourself and everyone else that you were worth every dream you dared to chase. Because deep down she knew. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving.